So I think we're ready, folks. Good morning. Thanks for being here. This is the last of our three-part series on coffee. So as you guys already know, you signed up for the coffee cupping today. So I'm going to turn it over to Nick Wesemann to lead you guys. So again, thanks for being here. Again, lastly, thanks to the honors program on .org, who runs the honors program for the idea, and then Jody Dietz, who runs the collab here to allow us to actually put this on for you guys. So thanks to those folks. I'll turn it over to Nick.
Okay, cool. So good morning, everyone. So we're going to do a bit of a coffee, not going to be a full-on coffee cupping. We'll talk about the difference between like a cupping and kind of what we're going to do a little bit. But before we kind of get into tasting the coffees, I want to talk a little bit about flavor physiology and how we taste and sense of taste and smell, because it's all kind of interrelated. So when we talk about flavor physiology, like how do we taste? What body parts do we use to taste? I mean, it's mostly the tongue, or is it? I mean, the tongue and the nose are kind of your main body parts that you're using. So we're going to talk about that. What is flavor? There's kind of big difference when we talk about taste and flavor. So when we talk about taste, and we kind of use the term like taste and flavor interchangeably, but when you kind of break it down, taste happens all on the tongue. So it's a very tactile feel. So when we talk about, if you ever taste wine, you hear them use a term like mouthfeel and body and stuff like that. So taste kind of comes into that, how rich something feels, the sensation we get on our tongue, the mouthfeel. So mouthfeel could be like, if you are drinking grapefruit juice, right? We'd say that has an astringent quality. So it's kind of that like kind of abrasive, cleaning quality. Think about, and this is going to be useful when we get to tasting later, think about drinking milk versus drinking cream versus drinking water, right? The weight of that liquid on your tongue, cream's very heavy, very full, versus water or like milk, which doesn't carry the same weight. So that's kind of what when we refer to the body of a liquid, that's kind of what we're referencing there. Aftertaste and finish, that's another way of talking about like how long that bitter sensation happens. Because you see bitter is at the back of the tongue. It's typically the last taste sensation that we have. So how long that lingers would be aftertaste. But taste is actually really limited. Like there's only a few tastes on the tongue. So you can taste something sweet, but identifying like what that sweet thing is, that doesn't happen on the tongue. That happens elsewhere in the body. But I kind of want to put this image up because as you're tasting, it's good to know, it's good to be able to realize where the sensations are happening on your tongue to realize like what it is you're tasting. So like you have sweet and salty right on the tip of your tongue. So if you're tasting a coffee that has a little bit of sweetness in it, the front of your tongue is where you're going to get those sweet sensations. If you're having something that's very acidic, it's going to happen on the side of your tongue. You know, and then we have bitter in the back. I always heard that the reason we taste bitter in the back is kind of like, from an evolutionary standpoint, like bitter is kind of related to like toxins or things that we shouldn't be eating. So it's kind of like the last warning before you swallow something that maybe you shouldn't, to not swallow it. So that's kind of, you might be able to test that a little bit more. But so your main flavors, kind of touch on it. If you don't know, we have sweet. Sweet's kind of what we're instinctively drawn to. Anyone know why we crave sweet foods? Besides the fact that they're delicious, why are they delicious? I mean, typically, a food or a fruit that's riper has more sugars in it, which has more calorie content. So if you're looking at it from like a survival standpoint, you want to eat the food that has the higher calories and has more ripeness to it than the non-sweet ones. So that happens on the front of the tongue. If you're ever cooking, if you have something that's very sweet, it's good to balance it out with bitter flavors, salty flavors, and acids, so that kind of cuts through the sweetness that you have. Examples of sweet things: honey, sugar, agave nectar, melons. So sour, we refer to this as acidity a lot. So especially when we're tasting coffee, if you're reading coffee labels, they'll talk about acidity levels or brightness. Brightness is also a word that's used to discuss how acidic something is. It's very short flavor, so like it kind of hits, you get that kind of tingle, that pop, and it goes away. It also increases your salivation. So if you have something that's really acidic like lemon, it kind of makes you salivate more. And typically, if you're feeling the sides of your mouth water and you're feeling the sides of your tongue lit up, that's something very acidic. So citrus, passion fruit, vinegar, coffee sometimes, depending on the roast or the style, could be very acidic. Bitter, back of the tongue, very caustic. With some coffees, and like if you ever taste wine, you have tannic flavors. So tannins are these kind of compounds that stick to your mouth and stick to your gums, and they kind of linger, and it has kind of this cloying effect on your tongue. It kind of dries out your mouth. So bitter kind of has that same sensation. You balance it out with acid and salt. But some examples of bitter foods: dark chocolate, tea, caramel, grapefruit. Salty flavors, it's an enhancement. I mean, it brings out the flavors and everything. It also has a salivating effect, and it makes you want more. You're probably not going to get a lot of saltiness in the coffees today, but some people do add a little bit of salt to their coffee just because it enhances those flavors more. It helps you to taste better. What else? And then umami. Umami is this kind of amorphous flavor that's hard for people to describe. Some translations of it or ways it's described as like fullness of flavor, meatiness, savoriness. So things like cured meats, sausages, things like that that have this really just like unctuous, meaty kind of flavor. Those are kind of things we refer to as having like an umami characteristic to them. Things like bacon, soy sauce has a ton of umami. Tomatoes, aged cheeses like Parmesan stuff also have a very like full flavor. And then spicy. Spicy is not real. It's kind of weird. It's not a taste bud. Spicy is pain receptors. So when you're eating something spicy, it's actually your tongue going ow, 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 stop. But some people really get into that and they kind of become addicted to that pain. But you know, we get that from capsaicin, which is the spicy kind of chemical that is found in peppers, things like that. It happens on the tongue, but you do get some receptors in your nose. So think like, who's had like wasabi or like hot Chinese mustard. When you get that, it's a very different spicy sensation. It's less of like a burning on the tongue and more of like your sinuses are clearing out. It happens like back here in the throat as opposed to on the tongue. They also have a bitter flavor to them, so chilies, horseradish, things like that. So those are all tastes. But when we talk about flavor, flavor is actually happening in the nose. So flavor is olfactory. Flavor is airborne. It's vapor, it's aroma. It's really complex. So taste is very limited, but flavor is so complex compared to taste. So you have orthonasal and retronasal flavors and like what's going on in the nose. So orthonasal is essentially just like when you inhale something through your nose. That's going directly into your nose, into the back of your palate, and up. Retronasal kind of happens in the mouth. So as you chew, your foods are giving off volatile compounds. And if you see, it kind of goes back here up into your sinus anyway. So as you chew, you're going to release flavor that goes into your olfactory senses as well. Also, why if you have a cold, you don't taste so much, right? So you want to have COVID, and I know a lot when people were getting COVID really badly, a lot of people lost their sense of taste and smell. If you can't breathe very well through your nose, food's going to taste very bland. But flavor is kind of how you distinguish things. So like you eat a lemon, it tastes sour, right? But if you're blindfolded, how are you going to know the difference between if you just ate a lemon or a lime? Because they're both sour. Lemon might be a little sour, but all those nuances to the fruit that have that like lime or lemon characteristic, they're all going to happen in the nasal cavity. So taking it to coffee, what factors are going to determine how a coffee tastes? And the short answer is it's a lot of them. The bean itself is going to affect the flavor because we know we have two main types of coffee beans. You've got the Robusta bean, which is kind of the lower quality, the hardier bean, and we have the Arabica, which is kind of the higher quality, the nicer, the bean that needs a lot more attention and care and is not as hearty as the Robusta bean. So those two beans by themselves are going to have very different flavor components. The terroir is that term we use to describe like how the land affects whatever product's being grown. So like wine has terroir, chocolate has terroir, coffee has terroir. So it's those flavors of the earth that kind of come into it. A lot of these flavors, especially these terroir flavors, the harder you roast a coffee, the more of that nuance goes away. So if you're really wanting to appreciate a coffee for like how, if you're wanting to appreciate the grower of the coffee and the way it's being processed, you're going to want to go for like a lighter roast, because you start getting away from those individual bean flavors the darker you roast the coffee, because as you roast the coffee you start getting more caramel, chocolate, those really deep flavors, as opposed to kind of these more delicate green flavors. The way we grind it and the way we brew it is going to affect flavor. You know, a coarser grind has less surface area overall, so you may not get as much flavor out. And then how you brew it, depending on how much that coffee is moving, you can extract more flavor out of it. But if you over extract flavor, you start pulling out bitter salts, and so that can affect the flavor too. And also how fresh the coffee is, because if you got coffee that's been sitting in your shelf a couple years and you grind it, or if it's coffee that's been ground, because ground coffee loses flavor a lot quicker than whole beans, that coffee is not going to have as much character to it as well. So, like I said, there's a lot of factors that go into it. So, tasting coffee. So some things we're going to do. When we taste coffee, you want to look at it first of all. So what are we looking for when we look at it? You might be looking at like the intensity of the color, how thick it is, how clear it is. Sometimes it's hard to do if you're not using glass cups, or it's a little bit easier to do with things like wine. But you still want to look at it, look at the color, and you want to smell it. You want to get your nose right up in it, smell it really deep. You want to pick out what aromas you can get out of it. How intense is it? Is it hard to get any aromas out of it at all? Because if it has weak aroma, you're not going to get many flavors out of it. Are there any defects in it? Or does it have any chemical smells? Does it have anything that's off on it? Those are things you want to pick up as well. Once you smelled it, then you taste it. And when you taste it, you kind of want to slurp your coffee. You want to slurp it kind of to aerate it. So going back to that retronasal, right? It's in your mouth. As you're slurping it, you're pulling in air into your mouth, and you're getting it excited. And instead of just getting through your nose, you're getting it to the back of it as well. And you're assessing the body. Remember how full it feels on the tongue, what kind of sensations you're getting on the tongue, how acidic it is, how sweet it is, how long does the aftertaste last? Is it a quick, does it linger for several seconds after you eat it, or does it dissipate almost immediately? And you kind of want to confirm any aromas that you detected. Sometimes, and this is really true with wine too, if you're tasting things that are different from what you're smelling, that might indicate like a blend. Like instead of it being one like coffee or one grape that came from one place, it's kind of a blend of product that's coming together. And you want to refresh your palates in between. So your palate being your tongue, first of all, so you typically want to like cleanse it with a little sip of water to kind of wash away whatever coffee you have before you go to the next one. And after a while, you also want to like kind of refresh your nose. And typically, like if you're tasting wine, or like, I don't know if you've ever been to the department store where they're like having you smell cologne or stuff, they have coffee beans there, because coffee beans kind of is what like changes like what you're smelling, because you've been smelling like something very floral and very perfumey. You take a whiff of coffee, that's completely different than what you're smelling. You kind of reset your baseline of what you're smelling. It's hard to use coffee as a nasal like refresher if you're tasting coffee over and over again. So one thing that I'll just do sometimes is just like sniff the back of your hand. Like the smell of your skin is kind of a refresher, just to kind of get something different in your nose as opposed to just coffee, coffee, coffee. But yes, that's kind of the essential steps on coffee and taste. Any questions on any of that before we get to what I know you really came here for, and not to listen to me talk about the tongue and the nose for 15 minutes? Questions on that? Okay. Well, let's start tasting some coffee. So it's not going to be a true cupping. Typically, the way a true cupping works, you have the beans in the cup, you put the grounds in the cup, you pour water onto it in the cup, and you kind of let it brew there, and you watch it. And you do like, early brew assessments, and then like after it brews a little bit, you break open the crust. And you typically use 2 spoons to kind of aerate it and bring it to your nose. We're going to do a little bit more simplified version. We're just going to kind of smell it, kind of get the aromas that we're trying to find, and taste it. So let's start off with some of these. So we'll have other coffees coming around, but if you look at your placemat here, we've several coffees. You've got this little spider web underneath it, and that's just kind of as we go along for you to kind of rate how strong each of these would be. So if, for example, you do not think that when you're smelling it, if you don't get a lot of aroma from it, if it's very hard to pick up any smells, you might mark that very close to the center on that like inner line. Whereas when you taste it, if it is very acidic and very bright, you might give that like a 3 or a 4. So you're just kind of building these like spider webs based on how each coffee kind of hits you. So let's start with our first coffee. It's still a little bit warm, but let's kind of start. If you want to be kind of pretentious, you can swirl a cup around like you see wine people doing. But I mean, it is good to move it around a little bit because once again, you're getting those flavor aromas volatile and in the air. And then like stick your nose in it. Getting anything off of it? How strong would you say this aroma is? Not super strong. I mean, it's not like hitting in the face, right? So kind of weak. Anyone picking up? And this is where I stop talking the entire time, and you guys tell me like, "Oh, I'm smelling this," or when we taste it, "I'm tasting this." So feel free to interject with what you guys are tasting. I'll kind of put in my notes too, but like, this is the fun part I think about tasting is like finding out what you guys are tasting and seeing if like we're getting the same thing. Like, but any flavors kind of right offhand that when you smell it you get? Dirt, okay. So we don't typically use the word dirt. What would be another word that we could use if we're getting those flavors? Earthy. So earthy is a good descriptor for things like dirt. Oh, I completely forgot to mention this. You do have a coffee flavor wheel here. These are not the only flavors you can see in coffee, but these are very kind of common coffee flavors and subdivisions of flavors that this coffee association has put together. It's kind of broken down into like, the center ones are very broad, and then like as you go out from like green vegetative, you get to kind of raw vegetables, and then you get even further descriptors. So these can be kind of good pickup points. Like, I'm not sure what I'm smelling. This can be a kind of a good kind of start here. But a roast. So roast flavors are going to be, if you're getting roast flavors are going to be those darker, those more intensive, like bitter smelling things, chocolate and brown sugar and caramel. That's going to come from the roast. For me, I mean, I'm getting a little bit of vanilla on this, very little bit there. I'm not getting a whole lot of aromas, really. It seems kind of simple in nature, but.
I'm getting a kind of like acidic, dark chocolate kind of factor.
Okay, so I'm curious, how do you smell acid? I'm not saying you're wrong, but what I guess what I'm more trying to see is, what are you smelling that's making you think I'm smelling something that I associate with being acidic?
I feel like there's a strong, maybe citrusy kind of smell.
Yeah, so like maybe, and that's where it's tricky about this is maybe you're like trying to determine, am I smelling like a lemon or a lime? Because you can't really smell acidity. Now, if we go ahead and taste this, let's go ahead and, does everyone know how to like kind of slurp their coffee? I mean, it's going to get kind of embarrassing, but you kind of get it a little bit to your mouth, and you kind of suck in as you go. So you kind of, if you cup your tongue like this and open your mouth a little bit and kind of suck in like you're hissing in reverse, I guess, is that a thing? You kind of aerate that, and you'll get a little bit more flavor in your mouth. So where are we feeling it at? What kind of sensations are you feeling on your tongue? Bitter. Coffee, I feel like you're always going to get a little bit bitter. So that's kind of like, I know this is our first coffee. As we go on, you'll kind of have a better baseline. But to me, yes, it's bitter. This is not like, oh my God, bitter. But there is going to be a little bit of bitter. I'm getting a little bit on the sides. So like how she mentioned she was smelling something that she associated with being acidic. This coffee has a fair amount of acid to it because it's like right on the side of your tongue. You get a little bit of brightness happening there. But really, even like when we're tasting it, you're not getting hit with a lot of flavors, right? It's not very strong. It's kind of, I mean, I would say this is kind of pretty weak flavor rise. It's got a little bit of brightness. It's not super bitter, but it's just not super, wouldn't say it's very rich, right? The body on this, it doesn't feel like there's a lot going on, does it? So what would we guess for the roast on this? So there's typically like roast, you can have like a light roast, a medium roast, a dark roast, and oh my God, like dark continental roast. But any kind of guesses on what kind of roast we might be working with here? So this is actually a very light roast. So very, very light. So light roast. When you roast things light, you get very weak, you get brighter acidity. This is a light roast breakfast blend. Lighter roast also means more caffeine because you break down some of that caffeine during the roasting process if you take it really dark. So this will give you a little bit more caffeine from it. This one, light roast, they say it's bright and fruity. I wasn't getting a lot of fruit, but I would kind of say it's super bright because like when we talk about aftertaste, right? You drink it, it's not really hanging around for a long time, right? Kind of drink it and it goes away pretty quickly. So that was the first one. This is from Cameron's. They say it's smooth coffee. Maybe a little smooth. It's not giving a whole lot of strength. Let's get our coffee, second coffee out. We'll start passing those out.
That takes with you too as well.
Okay. So you'll probably get a little bit more aroma off these next just because it's a little bit hotter. But I think still even with that first one, it wasn't super complex. You got it? All right. Does everyone have a cup of two?
Let's go ahead and we can
Cuppa. Okay. And as we go, save a little bit of your previous coffees because then you can always kind of go back and compare. Like now that we've had a light roast, if we get a different roast or maybe a different something, you can kind of go back and compare to how that first one smelled or tasted. Just make sure you refresh your palates in between. But if everyone has number two, let's take a look at this one. How about our aromas? This one's a little bit stronger aroma-wise, I think, right?
I feel like this one is easier on the nose.
Easier on the nose?
Earthy.
Less earthy, okay. Firewood, okay. I can see a little bit of that. Things like wood, things like that, also maybe consider a little bit earthy, but use your words. I mean, whatever kind of helps you get out there. Anyone else kind of getting anything? Dark fruit, yeah, definitely. I would get some dark fruit on there. And like, it's always kind of like using your wheel, like you see fruit, if you're getting fruit, take that further. So like, you think you're getting a dried fruit, a fresh fruit, a dark fruit, and then maybe once you actually taste it, then that's kind of how you would quantify that. So like, if we're thinking dark fruit, once we taste it, like are we tasting plum? Are we tasting blackberry? Are we tasting things like that? So you can kind of work your way kind of out on that flavor wheel as we go through this process. But I'd say definitely our aroma is stronger than the last one. Like it hits you a little bit harder. Let's give it a taste. This is going to be a lot hotter, so just mind your tongue on this one since this one's fresh. Any thoughts on this one? Less acidic? Yeah. It's much less acidic than the first one, right? So remember acid, are we getting much happening on the side of our tongue? Not a whole lot. This is very hot coffee. A little bit richer, right? How about the bitterness on it? Does it linger a little bit longer? It's not like sticking around for a long time, but I feel like on the first one, like you tasted it, it washed away. This one, a little bit longer, but still not like tasting it super long. Let's talk about the mouthfeel of it. Any kind of, as you taste it, I know when it's so hot, it's hard to keep it on your tongue for a while, but if you can cool it down and like let it sit on your tongue, get that weight on your tongue. Maybe a little creamier, just because I feel like this one's a little bit richer in general, so a little bit heavier by weight. So we were talking about the things we were smelling. Are we tasting some of those same things? Like you were tasting firewood, are you still getting those earthy notes? Are you still getting that dark fruit? And if so, are you getting a better indication on maybe what specifically dark fruit you're getting? Any thoughts? Raisiny could be a word. I definitely feel like there's some like dark fruit, maybe like a dark berry happening in this one. Yeah. I can see like blackberry or something like that. Very subtle. A little bit of earthiness. So what are we maybe thinking? What do we think we know? Do we getting any sweetness on this one? And sweetness in coffee is very hard because I know when you drink coffee and you drink sweet coffee, you're used to drinking like, Starbucks Frappuccino that has blitz full of sugar and cream. But sweetness is very subtle with coffee. So remember, sweetness is happening like on, not the tip of your tongue, but pretty close to the tip of your tongue. I burnt mine a little bit on that, but I'm getting a little bit of sweetness there on there. And it's sometimes, especially with this one, it's kind of hard to get through that because a little bit more bitter, a little bit richer. There's a tiny little bit of sweetness on there. What do we think can we maybe figure anything out about this coffee? What do we think the roast is? Medium. It's definitely darker than our first one, right? So this is a roastery one. This is a full vengeance. This is a very, very, very dark roast. So super dark, but we were getting a little bit more of those darker flavors, things like that. But yes, this is from the roastery. Any thoughts on that one? Did they like which one? So far the first two. Anyone prefer one over the other?
I prefer the second one. This one seems a little more sour.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I think a lot of people don't always think like sour coffee, but you can already tell just between the light roast on this one and the dark roast on this one, where all the acid go, right? It got roasted out of it. Also less caffeine in this one just because of the roast. All right, let's move on to number 3. Talk to me, how intense is the aroma? I'd probably agree with that. I feel like you're getting more aroma on that second one, but it's still more than the first one. Any kind of flavors popping out at you? Aromas, I should say, we haven't tasted it yet.
I feel like it tastes like cooked vegetables.
Cooked vegetables, okay.
I don't know, that sounds good.
It's hard, and it's like when you're doing this, like as you go, and I'm glad that you're doing that because sometimes like vegetal is a quality that we don't really typically think of, and it's like, are you getting like cooked green beans? Are you getting things like that? So yeah, I think we get a little bit of that.
Definitely has more savory notes.
Yeah, I'm getting like some toasty, like I kind of want to say like nuts, like toasted nuts. Okay, but kind of immediate intensity and aroma. Let's give it a taste. What do we think of this one? I'm not seeing a lot of happy faces. It's what? Skunky? It is pretty bitter. What about flavor-wise? I mean, very complex on flavors. Do we like this one? Why don't we like it? Can we quantify why we don't like this one?
I feel like I don't mind it, and that's mainly just because I feel like the first two, I got a very like strong feeling on the back of my tongue at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But this one, I feel like is very smooth.
Okay. Yeah, so smoothness, good adjective, like on how that feels on your tongue. It is pretty smooth. I'll give it that. I don't particularly like this, but I'd say that it is smooth. Got a mini body. What do we think? What do we think on this? Roast-wise, can we decipher anything from this? Herby? Okay, yeah. Greeny. Those herbs, vegetal. So this one is Folgers. This is classic roast. What else do we know about Folgers? You what? My grandparents used to use that all the time. Exactly. What?
Absolutely.
Anyone? So this is made from Robusta beans. So the first two that we had were the Arabica. This is that Robusta bean. So even on the label here, easy drinking and smooth with robust flavor. So it's a medium roast, but I mean, between the first two, so the first two are the same bean. This one's different. Are we kind of getting a difference on the two? Like you can kind of, as soon as you tasted that one, I feel like you noticed something was a little bit different, right? It's kind of hard to quantify, but remember, Robusta are those beans that thrive in harsh environments that get kind of, I mean, I don't know. It just, that's the bean that's used for a lot of like commodity coffee, right? It's a cheaper blend kind of for a reason. But you know, like I grew up around this kind of coffee. Wasn't partially why I did not like coffee growing up. Okay. Let's go to number 4. Okay, so we're getting kind of those vinegary notes. This one has definitely like, there's an aroma right there. I can't quite place it, but like, it's very unique and it seems like we haven't smelled or tasted anything like this so far. You what, apple? Yeah. And so then and I always like to push a little bit more, like you're tasting apple. Okay, what kind of apple? Are you tasting green apple? Are you tasting red apple? Are you tasting raw apple? Are you tasting cooked apple? Are you tasting baked apple? And that can kind of even get you even further. So it's like, yes, you're right, you're tasting that, but give me more. Mm-hmm.
Apples at underneath the tree in the orchard.
On the tree.
ones
The
that
rotten
are
apples.
fallen and starting to kind of ferment a little bit.
I do like the aroma on this.
Like you're walking through.
I can't really figure out what I'm getting off of it, but maybe tropically, maybe some like kind of tropical fruit. I don't know, maybe some spices, but let's give it a taste. All right. What do we taste? Talk to me.
I got like soy sauce.
Okay. Soy sauce. Broth without the salt. Okay. I'm getting. Oh, I don't know what I'm getting. How's the mouthfeel? I like the mouthfeel on this. Like smooth, kind of light, not super bitter, right? I feel like the bitterness on this is. I mean, it's there, but like compared to like the last two we had.
It's brighter to me. It's
Yeah.
brighter.
Yeah. It's brighter. So what's that telling us? More acidity. I feel like the first one was still maybe a little bit more acidic. So thinking about that, where we kind of, are we picking up any flavors now that we've tasted it? You said soy sauce, things like that. Are you getting any like fruits or anything?
I got like a tomato.
Tomato, okay.
Frothy thing.
Yep. I actually kind of like that one. Pretty good. So this is a kind of a medium light roast. So that kind of falls in line with, right, we're getting a little bit of acidity, but not quite as a light first one. This is a Ethiopian Harar. This is from RevoCup. This has a dry processed, what do they say on it? Mocha, tropical fruit, spice, complex yet balanced, perhaps banana toned chocolate. So anyone getting chocolate covered banana on that one?
This is number 4 or 5?
This is number 4, yeah. This is Hopties, I believe.
Okay. I guess, did we already do the Volcanica? Did we already do that one? Okay.
Did I get that wrong?
Volcanica
Volcanica is the next one.
Oh, well, I think our sequence might be reversed.
Oh, okay.
Number, according to this, 1, 2, 3, 4, we skipped the...
Mine has number 5 written on it.
Is this number 4?
That is number 4.
Yeah, so number 4 is Volcanica.
Oh, okay. Then never mind.
Yeah, I think we got out of sequence and serving. And then
Okay.
Yeah, because we skipped
So let's see what they say. Let's see if this confirms. So this Volcanica. So this one, well, mine was 4. So I've just been tasting something different than you guys. So if you add number 4, this is a light roast. This is the honey, Honduras honey. So the Volcanica is the honey processed. It's saying cherry, strawberry, pomegranate, red wine. So what do we know about honey process on it? That's weird. That's why I was not getting like soy sauce and anything on mine. I'm just like I'm getting like some fruit and stuff. I don't know what. So honey process. Anyone come to the first lectures remember what the honey process is? So when you clean the beans, you saw this like mucilaginous stuff on the outside of the bean. Typically that's removed. And this one, it's kind of fermented with that on. So you get a little bit more complex flavors. You typically get, honeyed flavors, more fruity, things like that. But yes, that was Honduras honey. That is a medium roast. Still kind of moderate acidity, right? Moderate body. All right, let's try the next one, which I have number 5 written on my cup, so. I guess I already tasted that one then. Okay, number 5. What are we tasting on this one? I have to go back to it because I just tasted that one. Thank you. How do we feel about the body on this one? I'll shut up because I was describing it already. Because mine was in the correct order. Banana. Does it taste like chocolate covered banana? Is that what we're getting?
It tastes so bitter.
Tastes a little off. What kind of fruit do we smell? Go ahead and give it a taste. Oh, yeah. I would say yes, a little bit. Are we getting more of that tropical fruit on this one? Since I already kind of gave it away. Maybe, maybe not. Are we getting chocolate? So you're smelling it, not so much tasting it. I would not describe this as a chocolatey coffee for me, but I mean, maybe it's smelling a little bit, but when I taste it, I don't necessarily get that dark chocolate. Do you like it? Any thoughts? So yeah, this one that is you're tasting now, this is the Ethiopian one. This is the mocha tropical fruit spice banana chocolate.
Nick, this is a dry process coffee, I think, isn't it? Or
The Ethiopian is dry pot process, yeah. So you want to explain like the dry
Yeah,
versus.
so for those folks that are here for that first talk, we talked a little bit about the different processing. So if the honey process has just a little bit of that kind of clingy, mucilaginous, sticky stuff that's still on the bean, the dry process has the whole coffee cherry, the whole fruit intact as it's, after it's picked and then it's dried, but it's fermented with all of that intact. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so the dry process has the whole coffee cherry intact as it's drying and then fermenting. So usually, all those flavors imparted from all the sugars and compounds that are in what's called the mesocarp of the fruit, the fleshy part of the cherry, are all there, and they're kind of imparting those flavors onto the bean as the fermentation process goes. So usually, in my my humble opinion, it makes a really stronger flavor profile.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, strong can mean anything, but it
Definitely more complex, I think.
yeah, there's
You're getting a lot more
stronger
going on
flavors.
here.
Not
You're
everybody likes
developing
it,
flavor
but
through that process. I haven't been looking at color, but like if you now kind of go through and you look at your coffees, are you seeing like kind of a color variance between all these? When you like see them lined up? Like that second one, really dark, right? You can kind of see like a color variation. What's going to cause that variation of color? Roast could do a lot of it. Also, like the brew at some point, because you like percolate and brew and brew and brew, you're going to get it to be really darker. But you can see like these last couple have been like a lot lighter, right? Like that honey one, like at least in my cup, looks kind of like honey, almost. All right, last one. This one should be a little bit interesting. Smell it. Should get some very different aromas on this one, I feel like. It is. If you can't tell by the fact that you're holding it and the cup is like cold, spoiler alert, it's a cold brew. But right off, like pick up any other coffee and smell it compared to this one. Like I feel like you're getting very different, like on the nose.
It's kind of more floral.
Yes, very floral, little spices. This is where I definitely get like green vegetables. Like just very green, like raw, underripe veggies like that. Just very green in general. Give it a taste. It's not hot, it's not going to burn your tongue. Thoughts on that?
It's not bitter at all.
Yeah, really like very little bitterness, right?
It's very light too. I mean, it's
Super light, very not bitter. There's so much caffeine in this. I can't even tell you. It's just so the way you do cold brew is like you grind your coffee and you just let it sit overnight in like cold water. There's no like agitation. So you're extracting flavor. You're not really extracting a lot of the bitter compounds, a lot of those salts that you get from like movement, because you're kind of not disturbing it. But you're getting a different kind of flavor extraction, and like you're just getting a lot of caffeine being leached out of it, because like I think the water was in contact with this for a good like almost 20 hours because I forgot to pull it out early, so it got a little more caffeine than I wanted. But I think the flavors on this are kind of fun. Because even though it's not bitter, what kind of flavors are you getting?
I got like rose water.
Rose water? Yeah, I get some floral on it.
Almost like a little bit of bourbon.
Okay. I could agree with that. Kind of that earthiness come through. I feel like I get some caramel on it, even though it's like not super bitter. I kind of get a little bit of those caramel and chocolate notes, which is coming from the roast, I think. It's just weird because like we associate like caramel and chocolate with like bitterness, but you're not getting that kind of intense bitterness that you would typically get from a coffee on it. So you're kind of seeing it in a different light. Do we like the cold brew? I mean, besides the fact that it's cold, like it drinks much differently, right? And like you can like keep this in your cooler, and just when you ever need a caffeine pickup, just take it out and slam it, or mix it with a little milk. It's good to go. But yeah, typically a good cold brew. This one, and you can make this stronger if you want. This is like 8 parts water to 1 part coffee. If you want it more intense, you could do 4 parts water. If you want to be a little weaker, you can increase that coffee. You can increase that water ratio based on how intense you want your coffee or how much caffeine you want packed in it.
Question.
Yeah.
Yeah, how was this made?
The cold brew, you grind your beans, typically like a coarse grind or just like, I just use like our normal coffee grinder that we use in our restaurant. It's like a drip coffee, like you would typically get at a restaurant. And then you just 1 part coffee to pick your ratio of water for, this is an 8 water to 1 coffee ratio. And then you just let it sit in your cooler, in your refrigerator, at least 12 hours, and then you strain it. So you don't even have to put it in a bag, just put your coffee grounds in your water, let it sit cold, and then the next day strain out all your coffee grounds and then store it in whatever and just pour it as you need it.
Very interesting. Could I ask another question?
Yep.
What are your thoughts on Nespresso capsules?
I like them just because, like, for me, I don't need to brew a whole cup of coffee in the morning. Like, I don't drink a cup of coffee, so 1 is good. But it is a little bit more of a pain in the butt because you've got to break it down and like dump the grind so that you can put the plastic and the paper separately to recycle. I think the main kind of problem with them is people won't recycle them, they just throw them away. So you end up getting more waste on it. I think they have the Eco Pods now, which are a little bit more recycle friendly, or you might be able to do the grounds too, but if you don't take the time to like break it down and separate it, then it's kind of wasteful. But it kind of depends. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? It's kind of a hot topic, I know, because it creates a lot of landfill if you don't recycle.
They have compostable pods in Europe, but somehow they're not available on the American market.
Yeah.
Did you?
No.
Oh.
You're done.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious. I'm going to ask a question just to the group. So we ended with the cold brew. How many people have ever, any cold brew drinkers? Okay.
I prefer it. I mean, it's just like, I don't like the intense bitterness. And I don't like hot beverages typically because it's just like when I'm thirsty, I want to be able to drink a drink. I want to sit there and blow on it for a while, so I like cold brew. But
The cold brew seems watery.
a little water, okay.
Yeah. As opposed to kind of the silkier. As opposed to the silkier
Yeah.
feel of the coffee.
Yeah, because you're pulling out a lot less because like even though it's kind of sitting, it's got contact with the water, you don't have that same heat that's extracting like more of that intense flavor from it. Same thing with kind of like with espresso, right? Like you do high temperature and high pressure and you get like really, you just like force all that flavor and all that character out of it really quickly. But since it's not being agitated, you're using that cold, it's like you're pulling flavor, you're pulling green flavors out of it, but you're not really, you're not going to get that same, like you use the term watery, like you're not getting that same body, that same rich mouthfeel that you're getting with like number 2, which was like a dark roast that we brewed hot and pulled all those compounds out of it. So yeah, it's a little watery. I also like to add like half and half and sugar to mine just because, and that kind of gives me the body that I'm looking for in it, but I still get that caffeine, I still get those flavors in it. But yeah.
Excellent. We're getting close on time. Any other questions? All right, folks. Well, speaking of sweet stuff, we've got cookies over here for you, so you can grab some cookies before you leave. All the coffees are still available to sample, so take some more.
There's also some chicory there. I didn't get it just because we ran out of space, but there is some Café du Monde chicory if you want to try it. Anyone know what chicory is?
Yeah, that's in this one right
It's
here.
this. It's a root that, like, especially they would kind of use with coffee rations to cut coffee to make it go longer. So it has coffee-like characteristics to it, but it's kind of like a filler that they add to coffee to make it stretch. At least that used to be what it was for. But anymore, it's just now it's its own thing. Like Café du Monde, if you go to New Orleans, very famous for they're like chicory and beignets. This like bitter coffee that you serve with like fried dough that just heaps of powdered sugar on it. It's delicious. So that one's up there. If you want to try some chicory, feel free to try that. Just so you can kind of compare it to coffee. I feel like you'll have a very similar reaction to where when we tried the Folgers, how we had that different bean. You're going to get a very different character if you try the chicory there. Yes. Thank you, everyone.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody. Thanks to Chef Nick for leading us through this. Again, thanks to the CoLab and to the honors program.